Hey folks, back again with some of Johan's replies to his Tinto Talks series, and this time it was for the 9th episode of it, which was all about buildings. It was the previous video on the channel if you didn't catch what he was talking about yesterday, but we're going to get straight into the replies that he gave to some people asking questions, as he always does every week. And the first one here is stockpiles confirmed then. Also food reserves by promise. Praise Johan Al-Gaib. A bit of a June reference there at the end. I do like it. Johan just simply said, yes, there are going to be food stockpiles. So we did talk about this yesterday, where we did wonder whether armies could like raid supplies. And from the actual post itself about buildings, it was a bit ambiguous whether they worked at a province level or as soon as you built up a stockpile, it just went straight into the market. Now, it does look like from this reply that the food reserves are by province, actually, so you could potentially steal them. And there is a follow-up question later on, which will give us some more insight into this, but we're just going to get straight on to the next question. And that was, zone of control is confirmed, I guess. Will that work the same as EU4? If yes, how will it work for such tiny locations? I did talk about this a little bit yesterday because the Fort tooltip did say about zone of control, and I didn't want people to freak out. And I gave you a little bit of a hint that this was coming in one of his answers. And as he says here, zone of control has some things in common with EU4, but some in common with Imperator. And again, there's going to be a follow-up question about this later on. But it's basically going to work like it does in Imperator, where if there's a fort in a province, think of like a duchy in Crusader Kings. If you take that fort, you then take the whole duchy. You don't actually have to siege down every section of it. You just siege the fort down, and then you basically gain a zone of control over that area. So it kind of like flips to your side, and you don't need to actually siege down everything. So it speeds up wars a little bit. It's a little bit less kind of micromanage of, I've got to siege down each kind of county individually, if you think of Crusader Kings. But in here, you're not going to be going through each tiny location. You actually just have to siege down the fort that is in that province, and then you kind of flip that province over to your side, and you kind of gain the zone of control then. And then also, as I said yesterday, later on in the game through technology, you can actually negate the zone of control entirely. So you don't have to deal with it during the entire game. It is only going to be there for part of the game. So if you really, really hate that system, you will be able to change it. And I'm sure there'll be some mods as well that will help you out. The next one is, are you able to destroy buildings when you're attacking? If I'm trying to take a few locations on my border, can I destroy buildings deep into my enemy's territory to make future conquest easier? And Johan just saying, not easily. So you can do it. It's just going to be very hard. I wonder if you have to like triple siege something. I'm not too sure. There must be some mechanic to do it, but it must be something that takes a long time. As to what that is, we'll find out during a war dev diary in the future. Again, with this one, there's a follow-up question later on, so do keep an eye out for that. The next question was the follow-up one about zone of control. We've already covered this, as I said. It's going to work very much like Imperator Rome if you have played that game, and as I described it earlier. Of course, as I said as well, during the Napoleonic Age, you are able to freely ignore zone of control if you have the tech for it, which, as I just said, is a pretty cool system. The next one we're on to, peacetime action. Will actually have something to do during peacetime. I think a big problem with Europa Universalis 4, if you're not at war, there's not a great deal to do apart from do events. You can like micromanage your nation a little bit, but you are really trying to map paint in that game more than anything else. Think of that as like the flip of like Victoria, where a lot of the game is actually based around not being at war. There's a lot to do if you're not at war, and it looks like in EU5 it's going to be a good mix of the two. And as Johan says here, you'll be building buildings, expanding RGOs, handling trade, dealing with estates, and parliaments create nice peacetime game mechanics. So there's hopefully going to be a lot more for you to do if you're not at war. You've also got colonization, all that kind of stuff going on as well. So I think there's going to be a lot more for us to do on top of what you could already do in EU4. The next question was, will buildings decay and therefore require a small amount of goods to maintain? And the answer is yes. That's what the production method is partly for, is to give that kind of constant maintenance to a building. As we saw with the Ford example yesterday, there's a constant stream of warfare items and stone and tar and things that are required for it to work effectively. And that's basically how the maintenance works. I would imagine there might be a small gold cost as well, but it's not called out here. So again, we'll have to wait for a future dev diary about that. iClips here with the next one. I think as many people have said in the community, this looks awesome. A Victoria Light, if you will, when it comes to trade and how production's going to work. Do occupied provinces produce things? Say as Sweden, your copper mine gets occupied by Russia, but you're a big exporter of copper. Does that mean the copper in the market drops and other countries get impacted, or how does that work? If Russia gets to sell the copper, can I buy it from the market even though I'm at war with them and they are now the provider of the goods? So the premise of this is, if you take land, if it's occupied, does that thing still work, or does it kind of go into a black hole whilst it's occupied? And Johan's reply is, it will be produced, but market access and other things like occupation and sieges may impact the volume produced and how much reaches the market. So I wonder if this is like how much control you have. So you siege down an area, you have it under your zone of control now, but the war hasn't finished. I wonder if it's like how much control you have, maybe how close it is to your market or something. But it does look like whilst you're occupying that land, you do take over the production that is there, at least some of it, a percentage based on something. So that's another cool mechanic. Again, as I was saying in yesterday's video, how all these things kind of interwork with each other. You're now going to go to war. Maybe you can occupy, as they say here, you know, a big area of copper production, and then you're kind of taking that copper for yourself while you're even in the war. And even if you don't keep that land afterwards, you've had a little bit of an income from it as well. Again, I really like how this works. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, though. In the next question, I just hope dealing with production methods isn't tedious. Will it be unoptimal to automate the majority of them? And Johan's reply is, primarily we use production methods to differentiate inputs, but also to improve efficiency and volume as the technology progresses. I'd say it's a good 95 to 99% good enough to have it automatic for most people. He suspects people on the forum are more likely to do it manually. Obviously, they're the most like knowledgeable or, you know, most invested in playing the game. So they'll probably want to mess around with it manually. He's saying most players will be able to just leave it on automatic and it'll be like good enough. You're not really going to notice a detrimental effect for having it automated, but you'll be able to get the most out of it. If you want to min-max and do things manually, you probably will have an advantage over leaving it to the AI, but hopefully the AI is good enough that you can do that, especially maybe on your first playthroughs while you get used to everything else. Nebulous then asks, can estates build their own buildings that have production methods? And the answer is yes, they can. So interesting to see how this is going to work, because then are you paying for the requirements for it? How exactly is that going to work? I wonder if these buildings are based in the same areas as your markets. I wonder if it's like the percentage of the tax that goes to the estates is then used to fund the production methods. Be a bit weird if they could build buildings and then it costs you as the ruler to actually help them run properly. I'm sure, again, we'll get more information about this in the future, but I would imagine it's probably going to come out of the estate's money themselves, but they will have the production methods that you can see. Maybe you could even send it to them, kind of like help subsidize their buildings or something like that. The next question, again, about zone of control and forts. So it blocks the army passage like EU4 and occupies the whole province, not just the location, when a fort or castle falls to the siege. And yes, this is what I was saying previously. I left this question in though, just in case people are kind of jumping around the video, but it does work exactly like it does in Imperator, it sounds, where you just have to take the fort that is in that province and then the whole province flips to you. And if it works like Imperator as well, if there's multiple forts, you do have to take all the forts, obviously, in that province. But if a province just has one fort, you take that one fort and the whole province just flips over. So again, it makes it a little less micromanaging. And I quite like this. I wish this is how it kind of worked in Crusader Kings. I can understand why it doesn't, but it would make wars a little bit less tedious, I think. So I am a big fan of how this is going to work. In the next question, do the estates build normal buildings, i.e. those not exclusive to the estates? As they mentioned yesterday, there are some estate exclusive buildings that only they can build. And Johan's reply is yes. If their satisfaction is above 50%, then it is a dice roll check-in versus their satisfaction. If they should build something that is a good building for the country or one that is good just for them. Keeping estates happy and rich will help you build up your country. So yeah, if they're not on your side, if you've annoyed them too much, they'll basically build buildings that aid them solely, or for the most part will aid them. If they're on your side, if you're keeping them happy, there is more of a chance they will build buildings that generally help the whole economy, not just themselves. So another reason to keep them on your side as well, especially if they have a lot of money. If they build up a lot of reserves, it would be a good reason to keep them on your side, because then they might spend all that money on buildings that kind of help everything, rather than having them build up a lot of money and then also having bad opinions of you. They're going to have all this money and then spend it on themselves as well, which again is kind of like a double bad thing to be happening for your realm. But anyway, on to the next question. Kingsleydale then asked, I take it that certain buildings and production methods will be locked behind technology. Also, will coal be available throughout the game, or will it be unlocked later in the game like EU4, where once you hit the right technology, it kind of appears on the map and then you can make use of it? Yes to the first, so there are going to be certain buildings locked behind technology. I think that's pretty obvious that would happen. And then the second one, a little bit more interesting, coal exists at the start, but it has far less uses that it will do later. So you'll actually be able to see it on the map and then I guess kind of strategically try grab those areas for when the technology becomes available, which people do in EU4. You know where coal is going to arrive in EU4, so you can take places ready for when that happens. But in EU5, it looks like you could just do that immediately pretty much and just pick areas, know they're going to get better, and then the coal is actually useful for things once you get to industrialization and some actual good uses of it later on in the game. Hypercope Emir then asks, can buildings done by estates stall ones that you want to build? Yes, but it depends on the situation. This is, again, how the requirements for building are going to work, because we do know, as we've seen, if you're building, say, a quarry, you need lumber and other resources to actually build it. It looks like from here that you will be kind of competing against the estates. If they're also trying to build something, there is a chance they'll take the resources that you want. We don't know how this is going to work. There must be some kind of mechanic which decides if you get the preference or them. The next question, this is actually something I thought about in yesterday's videos. Say the estates build something I don't want, I close or destroy it, they build it again, I close it again, etc, etc. The cycle, which again, I was saying yesterday, it would be funny if you destroy something and they just immediately rebuild it. But Johan's saying here, you can't close estate buildings, and destroying them will make them very upset. So you can't close them, they're either active, or you can destroy them, but it's going to be a crazy modifier. If they've put all that money into having a building set up, if you go in and just stomp it down, they're going to be very upset with you. I can't really see a reason why you would do it. I'm sure there are going to be some scenarios where you have to do it, but you're not going to be wanting to do that very often at all. Especially, again, if it's a useful building, you're not going to want to do that. But if it's a building that just helps them, I guess maybe there's going to be some scenarios where it's worth the penalty to do so. Mindel then asked, are there going to be any unique buildings in the game? And simply, yes, there are. Again, I think we all knew this was going to be the case. There's going to be some unique buildings that certain nations are going to have. Think of like Versailles in France or something. I'm sure that's going to be on the map. And other buildings as well, similar to that are historically relevant. The next question, is there a need to spend goods for upkeeping units? And again, simply yes. So the same as how buildings work, buildings need those production methods to produce things, but also built into the maintenance, as we saw with the previous answer. But it does look like units as well. So I imagine maybe gunpowder, horses, which is going to be a follow-up question later on, and other resources are going to be required to actually maintain these units. And I wonder if their effectiveness drops if they don't have a good supply of it. I can't imagine they just don't work, but I imagine if you have people that require like gunpowder and things, they're going to be less effective, and maybe they become inactive after a while. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. It'd be interesting to see exactly how that does work. Do they just become less effective, or does it actually like turn them off if you have like cannons, but you don't have any cannonballs or gunpowder for them? Do they just not work at all, or do they just have like 25% effectiveness or something crazy like that? We will obviously see in a future warfare one especially. Solston then asked, also, will all buildings be usable by all people? I.e., if I conquer a location with a building I might not normally be able to build, will I still be able to operate it? And Johan's saying mostly yes. So this isn't actually something I thought about, but as we know from yesterday, there are going to be specific buildings to cultures, tags, and all these kind of things. And it does look like, although you can't build them, if you do take those areas, those buildings don't just fall into a black hole. You can actually use them. It does say mostly yes, so I guess there are some buildings that are very special. Maybe they stick around, but they don't like operate properly if you can't control them fully for some reason. Maybe there's certain buildings which you obviously need tech for, that maybe if you don't have the tech, they don't work properly because basically you don't know how to use them and the other people did. More that kind of thing, I think, where it's technology based rather than like, oh, the French could build this kind of building, the English could build this kind of building, and if you take them, they just fall into a black hole. No, they are usable, but if the French have built some kind of like really high tech building, and you're like way behind them in tech, maybe you can't use that because you're basically not smart enough to do it. I imagine that's what he's talking about. Again, we'll get more information in the future. And then the next question, will there be a fix for issues in EU4 where the AI would go through player-built fortresses? This was the bane of me when I was playing this game. I used to play EU4 on the channel, and I used to hate it when this happened. I'm sure you all did as well. If you played EU4, if you haven't played EU4, you probably don't know what this is about. But as he basically says here, the AI sometimes would just go through your forts and say, I don't care about zone of control, I'm just going to cheat and walk through your lands, thank you very much. And it was never fixed, I don't think. It's still there now, I believe. But as Johan says here, the AI can't cheat zone of control in Project Caesar. The rules are less arcane than EU4, so it will be less confusing. So it wasn't, I think, that they exactly cheated, but there was like weird scenarios where they could go through it and things like that that just didn't make sense. But he does say here, I think the whole system's just been rebuilt from scratch or using the Imperator model. And there's a lot less this weird stuff happening, so it shouldn't happen when you're playing. In the next question, do goods give a bonus like in EU4? For example, cloth gave minus 10% local dev cost and wine minus 1 local unrest. The answer simply, no, there isn't. I think because of how trade's going to work, I don't think this would make a lot of sense. It did kind of work this way in Imperator, weirdly, and all of these systems are kind of coming over from Imperator in some ways, but in Imperator, if you didn't play this, when you did trading, each good gave you a bonus depending on what it was. So if you had marble, I think it helped with construction cost. if you had wine, it made people happier and things like that. The goods gave specific bonuses in Imperator, where it looks like in this, they're just going to be the goods themselves, and they don't give these weird bonuses like here, where cloth just gave minus 10% local dev cost. Why did it do that? Who knows? It was just a bonus that it gave. The next question, so if I need weaponry to recruit regiments, does that mean I will need horses to recruit cavalry? Yes. Pretty obvious. As they say, if you need weaponry for regiments, you need horses for cavalry. So if you live somewhere that doesn't have horses, you're going to be importing those to have a decent cavalry size. The next question here, kind of a funny one. I thought this was pretty obvious in yesterday's dev diary, but obviously not, I guess, for some people. So the process to produce paper from wood pulp wasn't invented till the end of the 18th century and did not become widespread until the 19th. Why is it available here? This was in the screenshot that he showed for all the processes to make paper. And as Johan says here, it's because in this screenshot, we'd unlocked it in a later stage of the game. You don't start with it. Basically, yes, this wasn't invented till the 18th century, and in-game it won't be available to then either. The screenshot was just here's all the examples, or a lot of the examples, of how to make paper. It wasn't this was everything that starts at the beginning of the game in 1337. So I thought that was pretty obvious, but I did see a few people ask this, so I guess it wasn't super obvious to everyone. But I guess this does confirm as well that certain things, as he mentioned with one of the earlier questions, there are going to be things that unlock as you progress. Again, pretty obvious. That's how it works in EU4, but again, just confirmation that is the case. In the next question, will there be building slots like EU4 and CK3? This was actually already answered, I think, in maybe the first dev diary that they did. And the answer is no, there are no building slots. There isn't a limit on how many buildings you can build in that way. I believe, if I remember correctly, they did say it's kind of semi-limited on the size of the location. So if you're building up to a city, that can have more buildings solely because there's more people living there and things like that. But there isn't like the slot system like CK3 where a province can have like 1 or 2 buildings and then a larger area can have like 5 or 6. There's no limit on it. It's just limited by the population and things like that. In the next question, would an example of specific culture tag buildings be the Dutch culture tag? Get to build polders as unique building options for them in wetlands and marsh locations to improve food and or agricultural production in that location? And the answer from Johan is yes, this is a good example of where a culture or tag is going to have specific buildings for that area, which obviously a very famous example with polders in the Dutch. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more like this that are unique to certain areas of the world where they can have buildings that give them a bonus based on like their location and how their culture grew up in that area. And then the last one here, so again, kept you here for quite a while in this video, as we always do with Johan's answers. I mean, the man just answers everyone's questions for the most part. So as I say every week, fantastic that he does so. We get a lot of information in these, but let's get to this one. And their question is around peace deals, and they'd like the ability to demilitarize your enemy or destroy border forts, for example. And Johan here answering, yes, that is a peace treaty that you can pick. So again, another cool addition to the peace system here. We haven't seen a lot of information about this. I'm sure it will be in the diplomacy warfare dev diaries that will get closer to announcement or afterwards. This is a cool change though, where you can make peace with someone, but say, hey, that ring of forts you have over there, you need to destroy those. You can keep the land, but I want you to destroy those forts to get this peace deal. And then, of course, next time you go to war with them, you can just take that land way easier. So I guess you have them kind of pinned into a corner, and that's why they would accept this deal. And then you could go to war with them and take that land as well. It does say also here, demilitarize. I can't imagine this is going to be something similar to after the First World War or something where you can actually limit how much another country has militarily. I think he is more talking of you can get rid of forts, maybe ports or something as well, where you could kind of like limit their infrastructure rather than actually say like, oh, you can only have X amount of troops. I don't think it's going to go that far. That's be more of a Victoria era kind of mechanic that might come in. I don't think it really fits with Europa Universalis, but who knows, we'll see in the future. And as I said, that's the last one here. So thank you very much everyone who's stuck around to the end. I do enjoy doing these videos. I'm actually so hyped for this game. It's really taken over as one of the games I'm really looking forward to. And I enjoy covering the dev diary and then these follow-up questions because we do get a lot of information. It's cool to talk about them and then see what everyone says in the comments down below. We always have a good chat in there. So do let me know what you think about everything you've seen and about what we might see next week in the trade-themed dev diary. But I'll leave it there for today. As I said, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here. I'm covering EU5 from announcement, launch, and beyond. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of dev diaries until then. And then I also cover Crusader Kings and other strategy games on the channel as well. But I'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next one.